Looking back now, sitting in this cramped 2-bedroom rental while my 4-year-old watches cartoons in his pajamas, I can admit something I never could before. I was the villain in my own story. I just couldn't see it at the time. My name is Skylar, and 4 years ago I convinced my husband to get a vasectomy, then cheated on him, got pregnant, and tried to pass another man's child off as his. When the truth came out in the delivery room, I gave him an ultimatum that destroyed everything we'd built together. I'm not proud of what I did, but I've finally learned to live with the consequences. It all started in 2020, during those strange lockdown months when everyone was stuck at home together. Alan and I had been married for 2 years, and suddenly we were spending every waking moment in our tiny downtown apartment. He worked tech support for a medical equipment company, which meant he was essential and working overtime while I was furloughed from my event planning job. Alan wasn't the kind of man who swept women off their feet. He was methodical, reliable, the type who read instruction manuals cover to cover before assembling furniture. He had this habit of humming while he worked that drove me absolutely crazy, and he collected vintage model trains that took up half our living room. But he was steady income during uncertain times, and he looked at me like I was the most fascinating woman alive. We'd talked about children exactly once, early in our relationship. I'd been clear that motherhood wasn't in my plans, at least not anytime soon. Alan had nodded agreeably, saying he was flexible about the future. That should have been my first warning sign, not that he was willing to compromise, but that he never seemed to have strong opinions about anything that mattered. During those endless quarantine days, watching Alan organize his train collection for the dozenth time while explaining the historical significance of each locomotive, I started feeling trapped. Not just by the pandemic, but by the predictable rhythm of our life together. Morning coffee at exactly 7:15, the same 3 restaurants for takeout, bedtime by 1030, every single night. My friends who were still single were posting about virtual dates and romantic video calls with mysterious new men. Meanwhile, I was watching Alan arrange tiny railroad cars while describing the differences between 1950s and 1960s freight designs. The contrast made our relationship feel suffocating. That's when the vasectomy idea took root. I brought it up one evening in July, right after he'd spent an hour explaining why he needed to reorganize his entire train display. "I've been thinking about something," I said, interrupting his monologue about scale ratios. "What if you got a vasectomy?" Alan looked up from his trains, blinking in confusion. "A what now?" "It would be so much simpler than me staying on hormonal birth control. The side effects are getting worse, and this way we never have to worry about accidents." He set down the tiny caboose he'd been holding. "But what if we change our minds someday?" "We won't," I said firmly. "You know how I feel about kids. And honestly, if you're not sure about that after 2 years of marriage, maybe we need to have a bigger conversation." The threat was subtle but clear. Alan heard it loud and clear. After a week of what he called consideration, but was really just him working up the courage to say yes, he agreed to the procedure. I scheduled everything myself, drove him to the appointment, and sat in the waiting room scrolling through social media while a surgeon made my husband permanently sterile. When they called me back to the recovery area, Alan was groggy from anesthesia but managed a weak smile. "All done," he said groggily. "No more worries about accidents." I squeezed his hand and told him I was proud of him for going through with it. What I didn't say was that I felt a strange sense of relief, like I'd locked a door I hadn't even realized was bothering me. The possibility of being permanently tied to Alan through children was gone, and I felt freer than I had in months. The recovery took longer than expected. Alan was uncomfortable for nearly 2 weeks, shuffling around the apartment like an old man. I played the devoted wife, bringing him ice packs and soup, but inside I was counting the days until life could return to normal. Normal turned out to be even more boring than before. By October, restrictions were lifting and I was back at work, but our relationship felt stagnant. Alan had started a new hobby during his recovery building elaborate wooden puzzles that took up our entire dining table. Our conversations revolved around his latest 3,000-piece challenge or updates from his model train forums. I started staying late at the office, not because I had extra work, but because going home meant another evening of watching Alan meticulously sort puzzle pieces while explaining his strategy. My coworkers were planning happy hours and weekend trips, slowly returning to social lives that had been paused during the worst of the pandemic. That's when I met Finn. He was the new bartender at the wine bar where my office team started doing Friday night gatherings. 28 years old, with the kind of easy confidence that made everyone want to be near him. While Alan analyzed and overthought everything, Finn was pure instinct. He'd remember your drink order after meeting you once, could tell a story that had the whole bar laughing, and somehow made everyone feel like they were the most interesting person in the room. The first time I stayed past my usual departure time to keep talking to him, I told myself it was harmless. Just friendly conversation with someone who didn't want to discuss freight train classifications or puzzle-solving techniques. "So what does your husband think about you staying out so late on Fridays?" Finn asked one evening in November, polishing glasses while giving me that smile that made my stomach flip. "He trusts me," I said, which was true. "Besides, he's usually too absorbed in his hobbies to notice when I get home." "Hobbies?" Finn raised an eyebrow. "Model trains and 1,000-piece puzzles. Very exciting stuff." Finn laughed, and the sound was warm and genuine. "Sounds like he's got the entertainment covered then." That comment stuck with me all weekend. When Alan showed me his latest puzzle progress on Saturday morning, explaining his method for organizing edge pieces, I found myself comparing his enthusiasm for inanimate objects to Finn's ability to make real human connections. By December, I was finding excuses to stop by the wine bar even when my coworkers weren't there. Finn and I would talk during his slower shifts, and he'd sometimes comp my drinks or stay late to walk me to my car. The attention felt like sunlight after months of living in Alan's shadow. "Your husband's a lucky guy," Finn said one night, leaning across the bar as he handed me my coat. "Sometimes I wonder if he even notices," I replied, more honestly than I'd intended. Finn studied my face for a moment. "His loss if he doesn't." The first time we kissed was 2 days before Christmas. I'd stopped by after Alan's office party, where I'd spent 3 hours listening to tech support war stories and watching him demonstrate his new puzzle app to anyone who'd listen. Finn was closing up, and when he offered to make me a drink for the road, I knew exactly what I was agreeing to. "This probably isn't a good idea," I said as he locked the front door behind us. "Probably not," he agreed, pulling me closer. "But sometimes the wrong thing feels more right than anything else." That became our pattern through the winter. I'd tell Alan I was working late or meeting girlfriends, then spend hours with Finn in his apartment above a vintage bookstore. Where Alan was cautious and predictable, Finn was spontaneous and passionate. He'd surprise me with impromptu dinners, weekend drives to nearby towns, or simply evenings spent talking about dreams bigger than model trains and jigsaw puzzles. The guilt was there, especially when Alan would greet me with genuine excitement about his day or some small, thoughtful gesture like picking up my favorite coffee. But it was easier to focus on his annoying habits, the humming, the way he chewed, his inability to read social cues than to confront what I was doing to our marriage. "You seem different lately," Alan mentioned one evening in February, looking up from a 5,000-piece landscape puzzle that had consumed our dining room. "Different how?" I asked, not looking up from my phone where Finn had just texted about wanting to see me. "Happier, I guess, more energetic." I forced a smile. "Maybe it's just the job picking up again. Feels good to be busy." Alan nodded, satisfied with this explanation, and returned to his puzzle. That was Alan. He accepted simple answers because he trusted me completely. The betrayal of that trust should have bothered me more than it did. In March, Finn and I got careless. We'd been drinking at his place, celebrating some good news about his applications to graduate school, when things got heated. Usually he was careful about protection, but that night we were both caught up in the moment. "Should we?" he started to ask, but I shook my head. "It's fine," I whispered, pulling him closer. "Just this once." Afterward, lying in his bed while he dozed, I felt a strange mix of recklessness and power. I'd made Alan get a vasectomy to prevent exactly this scenario, but here I was, taking risks with someone who made me feel alive in ways my husband never had. When I missed my period in April, I told myself it was stress. Work had been intense, the lying was emotionally exhausting, and my body was probably just responding to the chaos. But after 3 weeks of no period and increasing nausea, I bought a pregnancy test. Those 2 pink lines changed everything. I sat on the bathroom floor of my office building, staring at the positive result, and felt something I didn't expect: excitement. Not about the baby necessarily, but about the possibility of a completely different life. A life where I wasn't married to someone who bored me, where I could start over with someone who understood passion and spontaneity. When I told Finn that evening, his reaction wasn't what I'd hoped for. "Are you sure?" he asked, pacing around his small apartment like a caged animal. "Pretty sure. 3 tests, all positive." Finn ran his hands through his hair, but we've been careful. That one time was enough, apparently. He stopped pacing and looked at me directly. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet. What do you think I should do?" The question hung between us for several long moments. Finally, Finn sat down heavily on his couch. "Skylar, I need to be honest with you. I got into graduate school, full scholarship, but it's across the country. I leave in August." My heart sank. "You never mentioned applying anywhere so far away." "Because I didn't think it would matter. This thing between us, it's been amazing, but we both know it's not permanent. You're married. I could get divorced." "Could you?" Finn's voice was gentle but skeptical. "Because from what you've told me, your husband seems like a decent guy who loves you. Are you really ready to blow up your whole life?" I wanted to say yes, but something in his expression told me he wasn't asking because he wanted me to choose him. He was asking because he already knew he was leaving. "The baby," I said quietly, "would be better off with a father who's committed to being there," Finn finished. "Your husband wants kids, right? Didn't you say he only agreed to the vasectomy because you insisted?" That night, I drove home to Alan with a plan forming in my mind. It was risky and complicated, but it might be the only way to salvage something good from this mess. Alan was in the living room, working on yet another puzzle when I walked in. He looked up with that familiar smile that used to comfort me and now just felt like another weight. "How was girls' night?" he asked. "Interesting," I said, sitting down across from him. "Actually, I need to tell you something." Over the next hour, I spun a careful story. The vasectomy might have failed. It happens sometimes. I'd researched it. I'd been feeling off lately, thought it might be stress, but decided to take a test just to be sure. The positive result was as much a shock to me as it would be to him. Alan's face went through a dozen emotions: confusion, disbelief, and finally, overwhelming joy. "Are you serious?" he asked, standing up so quickly he scattered puzzle pieces across the floor. "We're going to have a baby." "Looks like it," I said, surprised by how easy the lie came. He pulled me into his arms, spinning me around the living room while laughing and crying at the same time. "I can't believe it. I never thought after the vasectomy I figured we'd never. Oh my God, Skylar, we're going to be parents." His excitement was so pure and genuine that I almost confessed everything right then. But when he started talking about converting his train room into a nursery and calling his mother with the news, I realized how perfectly this could work out. Alan would be a devoted father. He had steady income and patience for the kind of detailed care a baby would need. The pregnancy would give our marriage new purpose, and maybe the presence of a child would make me appreciate the stability he offered. Finn left for graduate school in August, just as he'd planned. We'd ended things in June, both agreeing it was for the best. He knew about the pregnancy, but also knew I'd decided to make it work with Alan. His goodbye was gentle but final, a kiss on the forehead and a wish for my happiness, whatever form it took. The next 7 months were a whirlwind of preparation. Alan threw himself into expectant fatherhood with the same methodical intensity he brought to everything else. He read parenting books, assembled the crib using 3 different instruction manuals, and started a college fund before I was even showing. His mother was equally excited, constantly visiting with baby clothes and advice. She'd wanted grandchildren for years and treated my pregnancy like a personal miracle. "The baby will have such beautiful features," she'd say, studying photos of Alan as a child. "Look at those eyes and that adorable nose." Strong family traits. Each comment made me more nervous about what would happen when the baby arrived, but I'd come too far to back down. I'd done the math carefully. The timing could work if the baby came a little early or a little late. And mixed-race babies sometimes didn't show their father's features immediately. The bigger problem was my own growing attachment to the child I was carrying. As my belly grew and I felt the first kicks, I started thinking of this as my baby with Alan, not my baby with Finn. Alan would sing to my stomach in the evenings, his hands gentle on my skin as he talked to our son or daughter about model trains and puzzle strategies. By my third trimester, I'd almost convinced myself that the deception didn't matter. This baby would be loved and cared for. Alan would be a wonderful father. The biological details were less important than the emotional reality we were building together. When my water broke at 2 a.m. on a cold January morning, Alan sprang into action with military precision. Hospital bag already packed, car warmed up, route planned to avoid traffic. During the drive, he kept squeezing my hand and telling me how proud he was, how excited he was to meet our child. The labor was long and difficult. 18 hours of increasing pain while Alan held my hand, fed me ice chips, and talked me through each contraction. His mother arrived halfway through, armed with encouraging words and family stories about other difficult births that had turned out perfectly. When the final push came and I heard the baby's first cry, I felt a rush of pure love that overwhelmed everything else. This tiny person I'd carried for 9 months was finally here, finally real. "It's a boy," the doctor announced, holding up my son. The silence that followed told me everything I needed to know. My beautiful baby boy was obviously, undeniably mixed race. His skin tone, his hair texture, his facial features, everything about him made it clear that Alan was not his father. Alan stared at the baby for a long moment, his face cycling through confusion, realization, and heartbreak. His mother gasped audibly, her hand flying to cover her mouth. "There must be some mistake," she whispered. But there was no mistake, just the truth finally revealed in the most undeniable way possible. The medical staff continued their work, cleaning and examining the baby, but the tension in the room was suffocating. Alan didn't say a word. He simply walked out, leaving me holding our son while his mother followed, muttering apologies to the nurses. Alone with my newborn, I finally understood the full weight of what I'd done. This innocent child deserved better than to be born into a lie. Alan deserved better than to have his trust shattered in such a public, humiliating way. When they moved me to a recovery room hours later, Alan was waiting. His face was calm, but I could see the anger simmering underneath. "How long?" he asked quietly. "Alan, please, let me explain. How long were you cheating on me?" I clutched the baby closer, as if he could protect me from the conversation I'd been dreading for months. "About 8 months, but it's over now. It ended before you found out you were pregnant." Alan's voice was deadly calm. "Or before you decided to lie to me about it. I didn't plan this. It just happened, and when I found out, I thought, you thought you could trick me into raising another man's child." He stood up, pacing to the window. "You made me get a vasectomy, then cheated on me, got pregnant, and spent the last 9 months lying to my face every single day." The baby stirred in my arms, and I looked down at his perfect little face. "I know you're angry, but look at him, Alan. He's beautiful. He deserves a father who loves him." "And what about what I deserve?" Alan turned back to me, and I was shocked to see tears in his eyes. "I spent months preparing to be a father. I called my mother crying with happiness when you told me you were pregnant. I rearranged my entire life around the idea that we were going to be a family." "We can still be a family," I said desperately. "You'd be an amazing father. This baby needs stability and love, and you have both to give." Alan stared at me like I was speaking a foreign language. "You want me to just pretend this never happened, raise him like he's mine, and never mention that his mother is a liar and a cheat?" "He's innocent in all this," I said, my voice rising. Whatever you think of me, don't punish him for my mistakes." "I'm not punishing anyone," Alan said quietly, "but I'm not staying either. You made your choice when you decided to have an affair. Now you get to live with the consequences." "So that's it. You're just going to abandon us." "I'm not abandoning anyone. I'm leaving a situation where I've been manipulated and lied to for the better part of a year. There's a difference." Alan walked to the door, then turned back one last time. "For what it's worth, I hope he has a good life, but it won't be with me." The divorce proceedings were swift and brutal. Alan's lawyer presented evidence of my affair that I didn't even know he'd collected: receipts from the wine bar, photos of Finn and me together, text messages I thought I'd deleted. Apparently, Alan had suspected something for months, but had hoped he was wrong. The vasectomy became a central piece of evidence, proof that I'd manipulated him into permanent sterilization while planning to cheat. My lawyer tried to argue for spousal support and shared assets, but the paper trail of deception was too extensive. In the end, I got our old apartment and enough money to survive for a few months. Alan kept everything else: his retirement accounts, the house we'd been saving for, even his collection of model trains that had once annoyed me so much. The hardest part wasn't the financial loss. It was watching everyone I'd known choose sides and watching them all choose Alan. Friends who'd been my bridesmaids stopped returning calls. His mother, who'd treated me like a daughter, acted like I'd never existed. Even my own parents struggled to understand how I'd deceived someone so thoroughly. Single motherhood with a newborn was nothing like I'd imagined during those dreamy moments of planning a new life. Oliver, I named him after my grandfather, was a fussy baby who rarely slept more than 2 hours at a time. Without Alan's income, I was back to living paycheck to paycheck, juggling daycare costs with rent and groceries. Dating seemed impossible. The few men who were interested in meeting a single mother quickly lost interest when they realized how little free time and energy I had. One guy actually told me he'd been hoping I was one of those mothers whose parents did most of the childcare. Meanwhile, Alan's life moved forward without us. Through mutual friends and social media, I learned he'd started his own consulting business and was dating someone new within a year. That night, after putting Oliver to bed, I found myself looking through old photos of Alan and me from happier times. We'd been planning a trip to Europe before everything fell apart. There were pictures of us at his company picnic, at my sister's wedding, building furniture for our first apartment together. In every photo, he was looking at me with complete adoration while I was usually looking at the camera or my phone. The pattern was so obvious now, Alan giving his whole heart while I kept mine partially reserved, always scanning for something better. He'd loved me unconditionally, and I'd returned that love with manipulation and betrayal. For a brief, painful moment, I saw myself clearly. Not as the victim of circumstances or the misunderstood wife who'd been driven to seek fulfillment elsewhere, but as someone who'd destroyed a good man's trust because I was too selfish and cowardly to be honest about what I wanted. I thought about reaching out to apologize, to try to explain that I understood now what I'd done. But what would be the point? Alan had moved on to someone who deserved his trust and kindness. An apology from me would only serve to make me feel better, not to heal any damage I'd caused. Now Oliver is 4, and we've built a life together that works, if not perfectly. I love my son fiercely, and I've learned to find joy in the small moments: his belly laugh when I read his favorite book, the way he tries to help with cooking, his endless questions about everything he sees. I still think about Alan sometimes, especially when Oliver does something that requires the kind of patient explanation Alan was so good at. I wonder if Alan thinks about us, if he ever imagines what it would have been like to raise Oliver from the beginning. But mostly, I try to focus on the lessons I've learned from my spectacular failure at marriage. I've learned that excitement and passion aren't the same as love. I've learned that trustworthiness matters more than chemistry. I've learned that manipulating someone into giving you what you want is a hollow victory that destroys everything it touches. Sometimes, in quiet moments when Oliver is sleeping and I'm alone with my thoughts, I imagine an alternate version of events. One where I told Alan honestly that I was unhappy and wanted different things. One where we divorced amicably before anyone got hurt beyond repair. One where he could have found his kindergarten teacher without the baggage of betrayal, and I could have pursued my own path without destroying an innocent man in the process. But that's not the story that happened. This is, I convinced a good man to get a vasectomy, cheated on him, got pregnant, and tried to pass another man's child off as his. When the truth came out, I tried to manipulate him into staying with an ultimatum that backfired spectacularly. I was the villain in my own story, and it took losing everything to finally understand that. The understanding came too late to save my marriage or spare Alan the pain I caused him. But it wasn't too late to become a better mother, a more honest person, and someone who might someday deserve the kind of love I threw away. That has to be enough, because it's all I have left to work with.